Common understanding. What's the difference between a common understanding and a tacit understanding that this is something that can't happen?
Well, I think that they have moved very dramatically from where they were several months ago to at least recognize that there is a common problem. That is, both sides are threatened by cyber terrorism or cyber insecurity or all sorts of other detrimental effects that cyber can be used for. So whether they can actually reach a specific set of agreements as to precisely what each will do remains to be seen in this process. But the fact that they're going to have these talks and that they agreed on these principles, I think, is a big step forward compared to where people were even several months ago.
Is the agreement because of politics, or is the agreement because, or the pending agreement, because of the understanding that the economic havoc that occurs because of these thefts of intellectual property?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think they wanted to reach agreement in this area to the extent they could. But I do think they also are vulnerable on both sides. Obviously, American companies are very vulnerable, and we've seen evidence of that. But increasingly, China is developing, first of all, its own intellectual property. A lot of Chinese are desirous of having their government protect their intellectual property. But the other is even the broader cyber issues. Both sides' infrastructures are related to the Internet. The Internet is the infrastructure for everything these days, and I think they sort of understand that fooling around with or disrupting the Internet or disrupting flows of information could be very harmful as well. So,
do both sides understand that at this point what we are really talking about is a national security issue?
Indeed, that's exactly right, Mark, that it's a national security issue and a national economic security issue, because it could be very disruptive of both economies. And the fact that the Chinese and the U.S. are talking about it and have made progress, and that they want to try to develop a broader set of agreements with other countries is a plus. Now, clearly, often good principles are not easily transmittable into detailed, specific agreements as to who will do what and what the penalties will be if they catch violators. And it's also difficult frequently to catch violators. In some cases you can if it's a government entity, but in some cases they're rogue violators. And both sides have an interest in moving ahead, whether they can reach agreement on the details, what the penalties are, what the methods are of doing this, and to make sure that both sides implement the agreement is going to be important to work out. But I think the fact that there's an agreed set of principles to start is a very big step.
Sir, one of the other big stories that has come out of these bilateral talks is that we find out this week that China does plan to launch a national cap-and-trade system. What's that going to mean for the Chinese economy?
They've been really toying around with this idea, thinking about it for some time, cap and trade. And they have a problem in China, which is anyone who goes there can see the pollution in the atmosphere. Politically, it's very important because there are a lot of protests in China among people who are concerned about environmental deterioration. So this is politically very important in China. The other part of it is that it will mean some factories are going to be shut down. Or, in fact, if they're not shut down, there'll be major improvements in their emissions control.
Is that going to slow down China's economy?
I think it probably will. I think it probably will slow down the economy. We know examples, and Chinese officials have already talked about places like Hefei, where a factory was shut down. They're willing to do this. Obviously, they're not going to shut down all the factories all at once, but I think one has to see this as part of an adjustment process. It's not going to be implemented and just dumped on the economy. There'll be a slow, or perhaps not so slow process, but they need to do it for political reasons. And they're also reducing the number of big factories in general because they're moving toward a more service, more consumer-oriented economy.
Bob